Record button.
All right. Let's see what we have here. Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Impact of Children in Gun Violence. My name is Ruby Green, and I am the Community Post Chair of the TJ Reddick Bar Association and the Criminal Justice Chair of the League of Women Voters, Broward County. I just want to give a big shout out to the president of the League of Women Voters, Monica Elliott. She's in the background handling our social media and everything, all the tech stuff. And also the president of the TJ Reddick Bar Association, Alexia Hudson. We do have some co-hosts here tonight for this particular event. I'm going to start off with Urban League YPN, Valerie Weldon. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, you guys. Good evening, everyone. My name is Valerie Weldon, and I serve as the programs chairs for the Urban League of Broward County Young Professionals Network. I'm also a guardian ad litem, so I relate very heavily to this topic, as well as administrative assistant currently at a high school.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. And Ms. Scherfreer.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sandra Scherfreer. I'm actually also a local attorney. I used to be a public defender very, very long time ago. And then I stopped doing that and started practicing immigration law, which I've been doing for over 20 years. I'm a professor at one of the local colleges, and we're actually one of the co-sponsors of this event because I am one of the co-hosts of a show called Race and the Races. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. I don't know if I'm supposed to do that, but I just did it anyway, right? So one of the co-hosts of Race and the Races, and we're co-sponsoring this event. This is an important issue that we need to talk about, particularly with all of what's going on right now. So welcome, panelists. I'm proud to be a part of such a great event.
And we don't discriminate. So whatever you guys want to do, just go ahead and throw your plugs in. It's fine. So this panel discussion couldn't have come at a more perfect time. Now, we've heard about the kid who shot his mom who wouldn't buy him a VR game. We've heard about the 2-year-old that shot his mom while she was on Zoom, and the 6-year-old who shot his teacher in Virginia, and recently the tragedy that occurred in Tennessee. This panel dives into the minds of children who kill intentionally and unintentionally. So tune in to Dr. Michael Brannon as he focuses on the tragic moments of violence as we show the ripple effects on the families and the killers themselves, in an in-depth conversation with the Broward County State Attorney Harold Pryor and Defense Attorney Kaysia Earley on the great debate over punishment versus rehabilitation and the competence of the adolescent brain. So I'm going to now allow the panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with the Broward County State Attorney, Mr. Harold Pryor.
Well, thank you, Ms. Green. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the Broward League of Women Voters. Thank you to TJ Reddick Bar Association, and of course, the YPN of the Urban League of Broward County. All great organizations here in Broward. My name is Harold Pryor. I am happy and proud to serve as your Broward County State Attorney. I'm the Chief Law Enforcement Chief Prosecuting Officer in the 17th Judicial Circuit, where we have an office of about 462 people, about 200 plus attorneys, and 300 or so support staff. So I look forward to having an informed and collaborative discussion and trying to find solutions. It's great to talk and pontificate and have great sound bites, but we need to have events like this where we can work together to try to find solutions. And I'm always looking forward to events like that. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Ms. Earley?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kaysia Earley. I'm a criminal defense attorney, as well as a concerned mother of 4, 3 of my children who attend public schools. So my concern is split between the juvenile justice system that is meant to rehabilitate, as well as a mother who releases her children into the public school system on a weekly basis, hoping and praying that they return. I want to thank all of these organizations that put this important piece together, because we have to, just like Harold Pryor said, we have to have this discussion, but most importantly, we need solutions. So I'm looking forward to discussing this today, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Earley. And last but not least, Dr. Michael Brannon.
Thank you, Ms. Green. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for inviting me to this, not only with this prestigious panel, but also on this very, very important topic. I'm a forensic psychologist for the past 100 years here in Broward County. And certainly have worked with just about all the people here in this panel in one way or another throughout the course of that time and had great pleasure in doing that. I do want to tell you just an interesting quick note before we get on to our proceedings here, is that the first time I spoke on this topic we're going to talk about tonight was in 1999, May of 1999, 1 month after the Columbine shootings.
Oh, wow.
So for 24 years, we've been talking about this. So I hope that some of the things that we talk about today can address some of those issues that seem to have logged on for quite a period of time. So thank you all for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to this.
And maybe you can give us a then to now.
Hopefully.
Thank you, Dr. Brannon. Okay, so gun violence is an epidemic, a daily tragedy affecting the lives of individuals around the world. It has become a hot topic in social media, legislation, and communities nationwide. More than 500 people die every day because of violence committed with firearms. Anyone can be affected by firearm violence, but in certain situations, gun violence disproportionately impacts communities of color, women, and other marginalized groups in society. Sometimes the mere presence of firearms can make people feel threatened and fearful for their lives, with severe and long-term psychological effects on individuals and whole communities. Here are some stats. Each day, 12 children die from gun violence in America. Another 32 are shot and injured. In fact, firearm deaths occur at a rate more than 5 times higher than drownings. Since Columbine in 1999, another plug from Dr. Michael Brannon, more than 338,000 students in the United States have experienced gun violence at school. There were more school shootings in 2022, 46 to be exact, than in any year since Columbine. This mirrored America's broader rise in gun violence as it emerged from the pandemic. An estimated 4.6 million American children live in a home where at least one gun is kept loaded and unlocked. These improperly stored weapons have contributed to school shootings, suicides, and the deaths of family members, including infants and toddlers. Nearly half of all parents with a weapon in the home wrongly believe that their children don't know where the gun is stored. In 4 out of 5 shootings, at least one other person have had knowledge of the attacker's plan, but failed to report it. Children living in poverty, urban and rural, are more likely to die due to gun violence than their more affluent peers. Gun violence can adversely affect the mental health and well-being of children. Children are exposed to firearms in a number of ways, including domestic violence and firearms stored at home, and neighborhood and school violence. This exposure may lead to post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety, in addition to other mental health concerns. Gun violence recently surpassed car accidents as the leading cause of death for American children. Child serial killers have been studied to have a certain biological predisposition. Their brain system shows deficits, such as having a low level of frustration, and thus they are predisposed to violence. So with all that said, my first question is going to go to Dr. Brannon. How do we address the fears that children have around shootings in schools and out of schools, such as, and this is a question from the community, such as having to look at an empty desk that a former classmate sat in, that they're no longer with us?
Well, so there's so many different responses to that. I mean, the job of parents is and teachers and the community is to help kids feel safe and to trust that the people who surround them will protect them and look out for them and be able to make sure that their health will be taken care of. And in our current climate, it becomes more difficult to do that with the more shootings that they hear about on TV, the more drills that they do throughout the course of their school day to prevent or to address any type of school shootings. And the loss of students and the discussion that goes around the dinner tables at home about these kinds of subjects, mine, everywhere else in this country, becomes frightening to kids. And we have to understand that developmentally, you know, a human brain, as we've learned, doesn't fully grow until about the age of 24 or 25. So kids of about 6 or 7 or 8 who are confronting this and seeing this don't have the skills to be able to handle that without a lot of things happening to them, issues of trust, but also issues of their own safety, but also fears that anxiety can produce, and especially things like post-traumatic stress disorder. So when we look at what happens to kids, they're the biggest victims directly and indirectly of these type of things, because their safety has been affected in such a way now, more so than ever before, and their fear and concern about something bad happening to them. One last thing on that. They also pick up their parents' anxieties. Kids are very good at that. And now, how many parents do we talk to now who say, oh my God, I'm so afraid of my children being in school and going to school and what could happen to them? Kids pick up on that anxiety and those fears, and they feel less safe, and creating more anxiety, less ability to concentrate, et cetera.
Thank you, Dr. Brannon. Valerie, do you have a question next?
Yes, to follow up on that question, Dr. Brandon, what are some of the psychological effects on the children in certain ages as being charged as an adult? And I'm going to compare it with the, are they labeled as psychopaths or sociopaths that hasn't expressed any remorse for these shootings?
Well, there's really interchangeable terms. Sometimes you hear antisocial, sometimes you hear psychopath, sometimes you hear sociopath. But we do know that some kids have less ability to empathize or care about other people. And that's what they all seem to share in common. School shooters seem to share a lack of empathy or a lack of concern for the outcome or the well-being of other people. They put that into a basket, or they never did experience that at all. And that can be identified pretty early with some kids. So that's the first thing you have to address is, how is this kid different? Is this a killing or a cry for help? Is this a killing because the person has no ability to empathize and connect with other people? Is it a revenge killing against other people? Kids kill for different reasons. But again, remember, their brain isn't fully developed, and their brakes on their brain to be able to stop them from doing those behaviors doesn't really develop till much later. So those kinds of problems and issues developmentally, what happens to kids, can really be a bad omen, if you will, for what they're willing to do, especially when they have access to weapons that they can bring to school with them.
Thank you for that response, Dr. Brandon.
Ms.
I'll pass
Shepherd.
it on to you.
Oh, okay. All right, I wasn't sure if I was next. So I kind of want to, I'm going to direct my question to Dr. Brannon too. And it's still in the same vein of like students, what they're exposed to, children, what they're exposed to. Now, what is the role of like television, social media, and what children are exposed to in this, right? You know, we have these events that are happening. They're on the news all day, every day, on a spin cycle, and on and on and on and on. What is it that parents, educators can do to prevent that? Is less exposure to what's happening. If less exposure to television and social media, would that make a difference? How is all of that affecting this continuous every year? Well, not even every year, every other month or in a couple of weeks, we hear another story. Is the fact that it's talked about on television, on the news, which is supposed to inform us, and on social media, is that causing us to see more of this take place?
So it certainly contributes. And we've been saying this for decades now as mental health professionals, that the more news and attention that these things get, the more likely they'll be copycatted or replicated over a period of time. And especially when news medias and outlets do things like use the name of the killer themselves and repeat that over and over and show pictures of that person. All of those things can contribute to it. It is big news when something like this unfortunately happens, when something terrible happens. But remember, kids don't have the same abilities to be able to handle the stressors of hearing that. You can actually watch right now on TV a video of the most recent shooting that we had this past week in a school. You can actually watch the police going into there and actually approaching and about to shoot at, and in some news media outlets, shooting the actual killer. When kids are exposed to that and they see that, they kind of begin to normalize violence. But they also, many of them, become so afraid that they develop secondary psychological symptoms and characteristics that require them to get treatment. And the parent, again, you know, has to be able to monitor how their kids are reacting to those things, what they watch, And the problem, of course, we also have is that you can't control just the TV anymore. You have to be able to control social media, what they see on TikTok and what they see on Instagram or whatever else they have in their hand. So being inundated with bad images when your brain isn't fully developed and you can be more likely to be emotionally damaged as a result can not only affect your psychological functioning, we now have good research that says it can affect the way your brain grows or doesn't grow. So as a result of being traumatized or overwhelmed with anxiety, you can actually wind up with a different brain. Those are the things that we have to be cautious of.
Thank you for that response.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Dr. Brannon, I know we are just going in on you right now.
No problem.
But-
It feels like being cross-examined in court. I'm very comfortable.
Right. I was
You
gonna
heard
ask
Lawyers
the
on the
question.
panel, maybe 3.
I was gonna ask the next question, and open up to our other 2 panelists, because I don't want them to neglect it. Okay. So
Yes,
okay. So
but
how do- go ahead.
no, well, I was gonna ask, let me just go ahead and ask Dr. Brannon this, because I kind of wanted it to be in the same realm, what we were discussing right now, but let's, for instance, when we're talking about, let's say the 10-year-old that killed his mom over the VR game said, and I know Ms. Sheffer was talking about social media, is some of this like attention seeking? I was just very shocked about the fact that this was a kid that was willing to go that far to to kill his mom for something that was very material. And also, I understand that there are certain aspects of things that kids may see on TV, and they get so excited because they see that, let's say, for instance, what happened here in Parkland, what happened in Columbine, that gets a lot of media attention. So does that in and of itself make someone want to participate on a large scale and do such things as this so that they can get the attention that they so desire?
Well, certainly for some people it can be. It's unlikely just with a 10-year-old that it would be. I mean, it's more likely that they see that guns and shooting people is a solution to a problem. And at 10 years of age, you oftentimes don't fully appreciate what shooting and killing someone means. I mean, in video games, people come back to life. And on cartoons and TV shows and movies, people come back to life. So the ability to be able to fully appreciate the consequences of your actions, which is why 10-year-olds aren't competent to proceed, that's what happens to them, is they see that as a short-term solution to feeling angry or frustrated or not getting what they want. And the more they're surrounded with gun violence, the more they see that as a potential outcome or option for them to resolve those problems. So kids of that age don't do it as much for attention seeking as they do as they see that as a shortcut solution to a problem. As kids get older, it becomes more attention seeking, and they want to be like the people that are in the news they see all the time doing these type of things, not considering the implications on other people's lives and on their own life and their families' lives.
Yeah, I didn't even consider the fact that a kid who's doing this over a video game is thinking that maybe their parent could come back to life because that's what happens in a video game. That never even crossed my mind. So thank you for that response. But I also had a follow-up because I was also reading that that same kid was like calling his family, like the family of the deceased mom, that side of the family, every day. And they were like, oh, he wasn't expressing remorse. Like he was just talking to them as if it was just normal. And I think that they were like afraid of him because after that, they were like, well, we don't want him to come home. And so can you kind of like tell us like why this would happen? Like what that type of fear of a 10-year-old, like why would a family be afraid of a 10-year-old? I mean, obviously we know what they did, but on the basis of.
Yeah, it can definitely happen. I mean, parents can become scared of their own children who they feel are out of control, or they may be overwhelmed with their own difficulties and problems and working numerous jobs. It may be single parent families that, don't have as much time to supervise their kids. Their kids have fallen into, bad or negative peer groups that reinforce violent options. Or there's just more availability in communities to guns and weapons that parents become fearful of. And you can start to see a lot of these behaviors early on in kids where they violate constantly, the rights of other kids. They hurt other kids, they push them down, they hit them with sticks. You can start to see some of these things early on, kindergarten, first grade. So addressing those things early so that they don't become the scary kid at the age of 10 or 11 or 12 that no one wants to be around, everyone wants to stay away from, even their family doesn't want them around. That's the important thing, is where are we spending our dollars in terms of intervention? When we see those things, we have to be able to address those things and take a different course with those, so you don't have a 10-year-old that people are afraid of. And that's not unique, Ms. Green. There's a lot of parents that are afraid of their kids and afraid of the actions their kids might take, especially when they're hearing that kind of a story.
So I just want to say one other thing on that. To me, when I'm hearing about the child with the VR game, all I think of like an addict responding, right? So it seems like it's such an addiction, and I don't hear those words being used, right? Like if someone's addicted to a game, particularly the way they're making them right now, they don't have pause buttons. So once you start playing, if you walk away from the game, you die, you lose an avatar, whatever. So there should be some responsibility in terms of like, these game makers and all of these things, making them so addictive that the students are responding like you're taking their drug away from them. Is that something, I'm not the psychologist, that's just like what I'm hearing this, it just seems like the behavior of a person that's addicted to a substance that they can't control themselves. Is that part of what's happening?
So again, we know that young kids can have changes in their brains by how much video games and social media they attend to. And if you watch a lot of kids, they don't have conversations anymore. If they're sitting, just watch any kids or families in a restaurant and watch what the kids are doing while the parents are there eating dinner. They're on their phones, they're playing video games. They're inundated with this. And you can actually, like I said, get changes in brain structure from watching all the video games they're inundated with. And many, many, many of those images are violent, aggressive images where people solve problems by shooting, killing, stabbing other people.
Okay, I'm just going
Thanks
to chime
again.
in for that one last question, and then we're going to open up to the final question. I don't want them to neglect it. Being that you said that with amount of video games that they are playing today, can we educate or advocate for what's the difference between an actual video game versus the reality of life and the consequences if you do this in real life? Because that was the whole issue with the car series of Fast and Furious. A lot of car racing and drunk drivers were going car racing.
That's
based off
Grand
the
Theft
movie.
Auto.
Right.
Grand Theft Auto, that game.
Right. Like it's an actual stunt. And it got to the point where entertainment had to start saying, please don't attempt this. This is all entertainment purposes only. Like what, because I just don't find it as much as we would like for video makers to stop making these violence games. That's not going to happen. That's a big money market parket. That's on their market parket. But how can we have our children to advocate for less gun violence when they're, influenced by video games?
It makes it much more
speaking.
It makes it much more difficult. And this is why I think Mr. Pryor's office has spent so much time looking at young offenders, youthful offenders who are inundated with these kinds of images and their abilities at the ages of 11 or 12. I did a competency evaluation on a 12-year-old yesterday. So their ability to be able to actually look at these events and discriminate those people from someone who's 25, who's doing the same thing, who is inundated every day with these type of images, and how well do they separate out that reality from the fantasy. So again, Mr. Pryor's office is doing case-by-case basis of these and looking at these kids and getting psychological evaluations on them. And those are the kinds of things we're finding, is that these kids don't have the same appreciation of that. It's hard for them to separate out like we do as adults, and controlling it is extremely difficult. You can't watch them all the time in terms of what they're doing. So them getting exposed to those images is more of a danger to their violent tendencies and propensities now than I think at any other time in our history.
Thank you for that response. So for the panelists, all three, you can chime in if you want. How do we have conversations with our youth around gun violence and acknowledge their feelings about it for those who've been impacted?
Well, if I may, I'll say this, and thank you, Dr. Brannon, for that perfect segue. I really got into this because I got frustrated very early on, both as a young man, growing up in America, growing up in Florida, living the Black experience in Florida, but also as an attorney. And I'm still frustrated now, is a lot of the issues that we're dealing with they've been dormant. No one's done anything to really address the issues with these children. And it gets to a point where you have a child who commits a murder, and then ultimately the decision is on me to make a determination on how we're going to steer forward regarding this young child's life. And that's the frustrating thing about the system. The system fails these children on so many fronts and so many different arenas. And so I took it upon myself, and what I consistently communicate to my juvenile prosecutors, to my chief of juvenile, is let's start looking at and noticing what the signs are that may lead us to believe that this child could progress to something or graduate to a more serious crime. And so, as we all know, the juvenile system is more so supposed to be a collaborative and rehabilitative effort to really address the root causes or what may cause a child to exhibit delinquent behavior. And so we try to take more of a collaborative approach. It takes us working with our public defender. It takes us working with criminal defense attorneys. It takes us working with professionals like Dr. Brannon and many of the other services that are offered in Broward County through our Children's Services Council to really identify these children that are exhibiting some of these issues, having those conversations, but also holding them accountable. But really understanding that we need to really rehabilitate these children and really try to address the root causes of these issues. And one thing that we can do is we need to have the tough discussions with these children as educators, as clergy, as members of our community organizations that are on this Zoom call, but also parents. And so I strongly believe that we need to encourage more programs in the system that are more family-centered, family-focused, not the traditional nuclear family, because we know that's not the reality of most children that we encounter in these communities, in our communities, but really incorporating a collaborative effort. Just mom and dad don't have to be together, but that's how programs like Community-Based Connections, which is based right here in Broward County, they take a holistic approach. They really try to get the fathers involved, get the mothers involved, and actually get them the help so they can be better parents to their children and have these type of tough discussions with their children. But we really need to take the time to really develop these programs, to work with each other, to collaborate, to have these tough discussions. But also we have to hold the people accountable. We have to hold these companies that make these video games. We need to go to Congress. We need to go to the legislature and have these tough discussions, because it seems that they're putting profit over our children's welfare and their safety. Time and time again, I'm sick of seeing these mass shooters at these different schools, various entities where children are being killed, and there's thoughts and prayers, but nothing's being done. No one's holding these people accountable. And these are the same people that claim that they care about life, that they value life, but they would rather legislate what a woman does with her body. It's problematic. And so we really need to put feet to the ground. We need to really pick up our phones, and rather than search through social media, we need to text, we need to email, we need to call our local representatives, and we really need to force the issue because our children's lives matter. And we really need to continue to have these tough discussions, but we need stakeholders to really understand that we're dealing with children. We need to be intentional when we're dealing with children, and we really need to get involved early on. It's too late when it gets to me. The criminal justice system isn't designed to protect children. It isn't for a child who's accused of committing a crime. The criminal justice system was never designed to protect Black and brown people. If we look historically what the criminal justice system is. So it's extremely problematic when we as a society look to the criminal justice system to solve these issues. And so we need to get involved early on so we can avoid these tough decisions that I'm consistently have to make on a consistent basis, because so many of these agencies, so many of our institutions and stakeholders have failed our children.
And, Ruby, I want to
Thank
jump
you,
in and say
Mr.
this,
Pryor.
because Harold made a good point about accountability, and I said it as well. I mean, I'm a mother of 4, and 3 of my boys, they're into video games, but I think accountability needs to start at home. Because when you're looking at these cases of mass shooters and you're looking at the access to the guns, these children are not buying, specifically with children, these children do not have direct access to the gun. So maybe with this increased accountability with the parents, then that will promote deterrence. Because of course, yeah, it's the video games, or yeah, it's social media, but that is not a direct, instant deterrence. We have to start with the parents. And one of my first positions was working in the juvenile division. And that was one of the first things what Dr. Brannon talked about, that their undeveloped minds and brains, these are not many adults. These are children that not only do not appreciate, but they do not understand. And with this cycle, everyone forgets that it's an ongoing issue because it affects not only the victims, but the students, as we talked about earlier. I mean, even with Marjory Stoneman Douglas, I have family members that attend that school even today. And the collateral consequences attached to that, you have the PTSD, you have, if you heard firecrackers, they're thinking that it's another one. So it has to start at home. And I think parent accountability, I think in one of the states, it was parents were the first ones charged in that particular state due to excessive gun violence. But again, here we are again talking about this issue, this ongoing issue, but of course, it needs to start at home.
Thank you, Ms. Earley. And this is actually a perfect segue because there has been a great debate over whether or not we should actually prosecute children, maybe even for murder, young age. We got children, I just listed them out, 10 years old, 6 years old child. She didn't pass away or anything like that, but the 6-year-old that went to school and shot his teacher. And we have a 2-year-old who shot his mother. And does one outweigh the other? Does prosecution of that young child outweigh rehabilitation for that child and the mental effects that it may have on those children? And this is mainly for Mr. Pryor and Ms. Earley, because normally that's like a great debate, between both sides as to whether or not we should prosecute or whether or not we should rehabilitate.
Well, I'll tell you this much. It is surely a great debate. It's not a great debate between me and a defense attorney. It's a great debate that I have internally. First and foremost, as a Black man, as a Black man who's lost 6 to 7 friends to gun violence from the age of 14 all the way up until the age of 33, family members and close friends, and very young ages too. And so it's extremely troubling. It creates an internal conflict, understanding that children are children, right? But then when you have a situation when a child picks up a weapon, picks up a gun for whatever reason, and takes another person's life, I have to factor in also how can we rehabilitate this child under the current system versus also ensuring that we keep our community safe, right? Here's the problem, and here's the harsh reality of juvenile system that many people don't tell the members of our community, and they're not educated on. Some cases are handled as a juvenile matter, but also people have to understand that the maximum term of residential treatment would be 36 months prior to release, right? And so a juvenile charge would mean that the person released after 3 years in the system, and they could only be kept under supervision until the age of 21. So for example, if you have a child commits a murder at age 14, a child commits a murder at age 15, we only retain jurisdiction over that child until the age of 21, right? So you do the math, right? So here's the problem. For me, it's not the problem of, okay, we're trying to keep a kid in prison for a maximum amount of time and just let them sit there. The problem is, and I'll tell you, we have a system before that child even committed a crime. We have a deeply flawed juvenile justice system that has failed these children all the way up until this point. And then this child commits a heinous crime. They murder someone, right? So now we put the public safety of our community in danger. And then we throw potentially a child back into a juvenile justice system that may have failed them prior to that. And nothing's being done. There's nothing being done to address the root causes of that child issues that cause them to exhibit that delinquent behavior. Versus the flip side, we charge them as an adult and they go to an adult prison, and we understand and we know that that is not the ideal situation for a 14, 15, or 16-year-old child, even anyone much older than that. And so this is the current dilemma that we're in right now in the state of Florida. The problem is the laws on the books, the statute on the books is fatally flawed. We need to rearrange, we need to rework, we need to reform our juvenile justice system when it relates to a child who commits a serious crime of that nature. Because if you're a child, a 14, 15, 16-year-old, and you happen to murder someone and it be done in a heinous nature, there's a gray area there. One, we only can really keep them in custody max until age of 21. And then we really can't really address those issues within that significant amount of time. And so we have to create a system that if in fact a child commits a murder, can we keep, and we should be allowed as prosecutors, as the state of Florida, to have an extended period of time where we can retain jurisdiction and we can put wraparound services to fully rehabilitate that child. The problem is that's not in place now. And then also what I have to factor in is victim rights. And also I have to factor in the safety of our public. And that's the tough dilemma that I have. It's not an argument, or it's not a debate that I have with other attorneys. That's a debate that I have every day or every time a particular case comes across my desk. And really, I think we need a legislative remedy to give me more power to retain jurisdiction so we can keep more children in the juvenile system rather than direct file them. And that's the problem. And it's an unfortunate problem. And once again, like I say, and I'll say time and time again, many people don't like this, and it's the truth. We have a criminal justice system that's not designed to rehabilitate people currently as it is. We have a criminal justice system that has been traditionally stacked against people of color and poor folk. And you don't want, we as a community don't want decisions like this coming across my desk on a consistent basis. And so how do we do that? That's invest in agencies, that's invest in stakeholders, that's invest in institutions that can adequately get involved in these children's lives at an early point so we can avoid situations like this. And you should take solace in knowing that you have a state attorney that worries and thinks about that all the time, and that's trying to come up with solutions to not direct file children. My goal and our fundamental goal as an office of the state attorney is not to direct file children, but unfortunately there are circumstances where we have to.
If I can, I'm sorry.
And Dr. Brannon, I was actually going to mention you because what he was talking about with the balance of justice and ensuring the safety of the public, that time that the state attorney retains jurisdiction is where the community comes in and evaluations to address those issues. Because if you have that child in the juvenile justice system for those 4 years or 6 years, you're talking about mental health, medication, classes. The goal is to address what made that child commit that heinous act. So it's not just let's lock you away in this level 8 program and just do this boot camp. It's years of ongoing treatment. It's years of, I've utilized Dr. Brannon for cases to, number one, evaluate the client and then create this plan so that we can address those mental issues. Because oftentimes it's not just social media, or it's not just video games, it's mental issues that the criminal justice system cannot meet. And that's where that third round comes in at, and that's making sure that mental health, because like you said, after 21, you release them, we're back at square one. And
I agree with you, Ms. Earley, and thank you for that. Let's put the professionals, let's bring them in and let them do the job. Let's get more Dr. Brannon's in there and more community-based organizations that actually know these communities. My good friend Mona Lisa's on there, who's one of the realest sisters I've ever met. We need people that's lived the experience, that's grown up in the same communities as these children, that can reach out to them and have those conversations. We need to rethink this thing because we're failing. The criminal justice system is failing. We really need to figure out how we can get involved early on. It's aspirational, right, for us to say, and we all believe it and we all hope that, yeah, okay, a kid murders someone, right? They use a gun and murder someone, and we don't direct file them. We charge them as a child. They're in jurisdiction for 6 to 7 years, and they're going to get all these wraparound services. They're going to get providers. They're going to address the root cause of the issue. The problem is that's not the reality, right? Because 9 times out of 10, many children who have committed these offenses, they've committed other offenses. This is not their first go round, right? They've had 3, 4, 5 cases, and guess what? They're in that same juvenile justice system that failed them, right? That didn't offer those services, that was cutting corners and wasn't giving the service that these children need. And then ultimately we deal with the ultimate issue. A child finds a gun, picks up a gun and kills someone, and then I have to make the tough decision. The system has failed. It's failing, and we really need to reform it to really get more people like Dr. Brannon, get more community-based organizations to address these root causes of the issues, but really have wraparound services that can address these needs of these children. Because like I said, you don't want that decision to come to me, because at the end of the day, I have to balance the well-being of the child to see if we can rehabilitate the child, but also have the heavy weight of the world to ensure that our public is safe. And sometimes we have to really make that tough decision, which is the toughest decision that I ultimately have to make on any given day when those cases are presented to me.
Dr. Brannon, you had something to add on?
I did. I'm so excited we're having this conversation. I mean, this is really highlighting so many of the concerns that people talk about privately, professionals in the community. So I'm so glad we're having this dialogue. Just a couple of points just to add on to these wonderful points that have already been made. Juvenile judges, if you walk into any of the juvenile courts in Broward or anywhere else, they struggle every day with placements, for proper placements to get interventions for kids. Every single day, where am I going to place them? Where can I get these services? What can I do? And they're very frustrated. So when the dollars don't go into intervention services for kids who are first-time offenders, who have done something by mistake or out of impulsivity, or they're led into it by their peers, we don't have a place to put them. It just lets the problems fester a lot of times and gets worse over time. And I'll also tell you something else that I really think that Mr. Pryor is addressing there as well, is that, you know, and over the years I've evaluated kids, there's some really dangerous kids who will hurt other people who are not amenable to any form of intervention. And then there's other kids who do terrible things, but are very open to intervention, who we can change and help and get them back on the right track. And so having people to be able to look at them and evaluate them and be able to tell you which one goes into which category. We're not 100% correct, so it takes more than one of us sometimes to do it. But being able to separate out who'll benefit from those rare services that we have and who won't is just as important. You can't use age as the marker. Sometimes 12-year-olds are very dangerous and very competent. 14-year-olds are not dangerous at all sometimes and are incompetent. So you can't use numbers by ages as the marker. What you have to do is a thorough evaluation and get them the right services to prevent them to continue, to get them to stop them from coming to Mr. Pryor's attention in the future.
Thank you. Okay,
Louis,
so we
can I
actually
make a
have
comment?
a question from the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me make a comment. So I'm really enjoying this panel, but I'm over here I'm a little bit of a troublemaker. I'm gonna just say that, right? And I think we needed to have like a community activist on this panel. And let me tell you why. Because I'm hearing, I heard, there's a comment about parents' responsibility and everything like that. And we're not talking about corporate responsibility. You could have the best parents doing the best job in their house. And there's so much influence out there that sometimes it doesn't even matter what's happening in the house. There's certain video games that I have not purchased for my child, but they go to school, somebody else got it on their phone and they get exposed to it anyway, even though it didn't come outside of my house, right? And for us to sit here and not act like corporations aren't profiting and benefiting and continuing to make this vicious cycle happen, I think it's a bit of a disservice, right? Because again, the influence out there is so strong and it's such a powerful machine that we're fighting that we find ourselves having 12-year-olds that are so dangerous that everybody is afraid of them, right? They create, when I mentioned the video games earlier, that's a real thing. They're creating addicts at very young age. I don't even take my kids to Chuck E. Cheese because to me, it's like a casino for kids, right? So they're creating these addicts at very young age, exposing them to way too much. And the fact that they, corporate, and when I say they, I am talking about corporations, are making parents feel bad that they're not doing their job when they're creating, these news. I don't even watch the news because you wake up in the morning to people being murdered and they want you to go to sleep to people being murdered. And as an adult, if that is too much for me, just like you said, it affects a child's brain, it's too much. It's absolutely too much. So, yes, some parents are at fault, but this guilting parents into thinking that they're doing this horrible job and not holding corporations responsible for contributing to this in a major way, I think is an absolute disservice. And we need to have an activist on here that set up some stuff that we may need to start boycotting these organizations unless they're willing to contribute and to fund some of these mental health and all of these different services. And we shouldn't be sitting here feeling bad that we're not doing enough when we're really fighting against some very big money machines. That's
does that actually turn into legislation? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Miss Earley.
I don't want my words to be misinterpreted. When I said to hold the parents responsible, specifically is the fact that they have access to a gun in the parent's home that should have been locked, that should have been, you know, in a safe space where the child should not access in that particular realm. And again, I'm a mom, my children play video games, but I limit it as a mother in my home. So there's certain things that parents can do. I'm doing everything that I can. Do I have a control over my children of what they see, what they view on their phones outside? But we have to start taking responsibility. I'm taking responsibility and nothing has happened with my children.
No, there were
And
no
that
shots
is-
fired here. There were no shots fired at
No, I'm just
anybody
saying-
when I made that statement. Okay, I just want to make that clear.
I want to make sure it was clear for everyone watching that if there's accountability in every area, in every pocket, it's easy to say, let's go after corporate America. That's the big giant that's making billions of dollars. But if we start home, but I totally agree with it. I'm just now learning the video games, but I believe that if a child has access to a gun that's assigned to the parent, then there needs to be accountability. That was completely negligent for that child to gain access. It could have prevented a murder, but
Right.
there are activists out there that are, you know, out there helping our children, programs, after school programs. But again, guess what? They're poorly attended. You have some services out there, but the parents need to take the children. And oftentimes they don't take them unless it's court ordered.
Okay, so all right, so there was some shot fired at me because I'm one of those single moms that sometimes people always talk about how single mamas, they can't raise their kids and they're in all these kind of environments and that type of thing, right? So, and again, I didn't take it as no shots fired because I am overwhelmed. I work 2, 3, 4 jobs, can't do all of these things, right? So for us to even say that, oh, parents aren't taking their kids, there's 1,000 reasons why, right? And part of that is all of this corporate stuff where everything costs too much and ain't nobody making more money. And so we find ourselves not being able to take our kid to something that might be free or whatever. So again, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that we absolutely, even when we're having these conversations, need to acknowledge and hold a lot of these corporations responsible instead of, blaming single mamas and people, not having, having guns in their house and all those types of things. That's all I'm saying. I truly appreciate this panel. I believe this conversation is absolutely important. At the same time, that is a big piece that needs to be discussed. And I just, like I said, I'm a little bit of a troublemaker. So that was a little piece that needed to be discussed. And that's why I wanted to bring that to the forefront, right? Because I have to listen to people talking about me as a single mom, how all of these things I'm not doing, but I don't take it as no shot fires because I have perspective and I understand how this works.
I think actually when it comes to this subject, there are plenty of issues that we can discuss, right? We don't have enough time to go into all the details and the issues that result from gun violence in America, corporate America. I think it's, when we think about it, both of you are right. Parents should be held responsible for, what's going on in their household, and corporate America should be held responsible, obviously, but who is easier to get to, right? It's a lot harder to try and go after corporate America and try and
it shouldn't be though. It shouldn't be, and that's a fallacy that it is.
But reality is that we don't really see anybody going after corporate America and trying to charge them for a murder that happened.
That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem.
No, we don't have to charge them. There's power in the pockets. We don't have to charge them. There's power in numbers. We can boycott. Who's buying the video games? Again, parents. I mean, listen, I grew up in the inner city. So when I hear, and my mother raised 8 children by herself. So you can't just single it out and say, oh, it's people in the inner city who are doing this. There's power in numbers, unity, and in the pocket. So we may not go after them criminally, but we can speak volumes. If we believe the root of these mass shootings are these violent video games or even the apps, we as parents can take control. Who's paying the cell phone bills? All I'm saying is we can do our part. Instead of saying, oh, get corporate America, we can't get them right now. But what we can do is do as much as we can for free in our home. My 4 children, I pay all of their phone bills. So what do? I have access to all their cell phones. I have access to the apps. I have time limits on all of their apps. Even my 8-year-old, he cannot play that video game. And I need to see what video game you're playing. Social media, I have all of my children's social media pages so I can see what you're doing. Now, will they have a fake one? Possibly. But we as parents have to take responsibility and do as much as we can do so that then we can go after corporate America afterwards. All I'm saying is it starts at the home, bottom line.
Mr. Pryor, I think you had something to add on.
Well,
Before
yeah,
I
I mean,
ask the next
Look,
question.
as a parent and someone who's kind of had both experiences, look, we're at a point where we limit the tablets and everything. My wife and I have made the decision our kids aren't going to have phones until they leave our house. And part of the reason why, and we've kind of limited. Look, I used to be a general counsel. There's a connection here, and we're gonna get to it. I used to be a general counsel for a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company. And many of these people are engineers, and I know people who have worked for the Microsofts. I've read studies on, Apple and all these other companies. All of these executives, high-end executives, the founder of Apple, Bill Gates, they never allowed their children to own electronic devices or tablets because they knew the dangers of these tablets and devices. I don't think you have to be a billionaire to know that. I don't think you need to be the most informed person to know that. But once you get that information, and once we got that information, you better believe we corrected our steps and our movement as parents. And so I think it takes individual autonomy on you as a parent, whether you are in a 2-parent household, whether you're a single parent. When you know better, you do better, right? And we have to take it upon ourselves to avail ourselves to these information. It goes with food. If you don't pay attention to what you're putting in your body, it can have an adverse effect on your health, right? It can affect your ability to live, right? And so we have to look at these devices. We have to look at these video games, anything that our children consume, whether it be via food, water, drink, or electronics, or whatever they're reading. We really need to be intentional and deliberate about what our children are consuming and what they're putting into their bodies. And so we have to take onus of that. And this is not me attacking anyone. It's a battle that I'm consistently having. My wife is constantly reminding me, Harold, why'd you let that boy sit on the tablet for 2 hours, right? And I have to catch myself sometimes, even myself. And so these are things that we have to do. We know better now. We all know better now. We all have access to Google. We have access to books. We can get this information. But also as a community, collectively, we have buying power. I mean, consistently on a year-to-year basis, we as Black and brown people, we're constantly buying these name brand clothes. We're constantly buying these electronic devices, yet we're not demanding anything from these major Fortune 500 companies. And so we need to have a deliberate effort by our groups like the Urban League, like our groups like the NAACP, like the Florida League of Women Voters and many other civic organizations, where we need to have a coordinated effort. If you want to continue to thrive and to make billions of dollars off of our buying power as a community, you need to meet our demands. Invest in more mental health communities. Invest in more restorative justice initiatives in these circuits. Invest in anti-gun laws or gun control laws to keep our community safer. Invest in our communities in a meaningful way. These are things that we can do. We can demand that. It's just we need to have a coordinated effort, and we need to be deliberate and intentional in how we go about it. And it's doable because we know better. Collectively and individually, we know better. It's just we need to put our minds together to actually make it happen.
Mr. Pryor, I'm so glad to hear you talking about solutions on this. I mean, kids are dying and at an alarming rate, more so now than ever before. And we can't even talk to each other much as a country. And I'm so happy to hear this passion on this panel, because when you live in a culture where an 18-year-old without a fully developed brain can get an assault rifle and buy multiple assault rifles, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for problems. When we have kids who we identify as having significant problems and likely to harm other kids and already have, and we can't get services for that kid because there's not enough services out there to do it, or the right people to step up to do it, or that child is poor and can't afford those services, we've got a serious problem. When you have, people who kids look up to, sports figures, entertainers who glorify guns and weapons and, make videos with guns and weapons and are caught with guns, and gun violence, that's a loud message. We're in a lot of trouble. And don't ignore the fact that we're so polarized as a country right now, more so now than ever before, where people actually are supportive and advocating violence as a solution to problems. So when you start seeing those type of things, you're creating a fertile ground. The video games is not the problem. Video games is the symptom of the problem. The problem is that we're not taking care of each other. We're not looking out for each other. We're not agreeing and coming to solutions, as Mr. Pryor and Ms. Earley were talking about earlier there. That's what we need to be talking about, is what can we do to intervene, or otherwise 20 years from now, hopefully, if I'm still around in 20 years, I'll be on another panel talking about these kinds of things. So what can we do now with this passion to implement some changes to make a difference, as opposed to just repeating that these are the problems and, oh my God, we've got to do something about it.
I just want to add something to that, and I appreciate the whole panel discussion about this, and shout outs to the parents who are, doing what they're supposed to do. And I'm just speaking from a person that's actually official that works in school. I have a group of parents that are very passionate about their kids. They're very involved. They're very on it when their kid gets a D in a class and wants a parent-teacher conference. And then you have these group of parents that honestly, that just don't care until it's too late. So how can we target more of those group of parents and who has coddled their kids, unfortunately, I have to say that, and doesn't break down the reality of life. Like, for example, recently, I had a situation in our school where a student was charged with armed robbery, and mom blamed us as a school, like, well, what are you guys doing to help my child? Your child decides to go and do these activities outside of the school. How the school officials are in charge of that? But before I add to that, I'm just going to move on to the next question, which are the advantages or disadvantages of charging a child as an adult and keep them in a juvenile system? I think we covered some bases of that, but I want to dive more in depth to that.
Thank you for the question. I hate the question. Nothing personal against anybody who wrote the question, because I don't hate it because I don't want to answer. I hate it because there's no advantage. There's no advantage to direct filing a child. And this is from someone who has direct filed children for murder. And there's really no easy answer to that. There is no advantage to me in doing that. There's no advantage to us as a criminal justice system doing that. It's really looking at a totality of circumstances, looking at weighing, like I said earlier, the public safety, but also weighing the realities of the situation. And like I said, the criminal justice system, especially the juvenile justice system as designed, that child is not going to go into the juvenile justice system getting any better. And are they going to get any better in the adult system? No, probably not, right? But also, I swore to uphold the Constitution to keep our community safe. And so, unfortunately, we have to make that determination, that situation. And my goal is to do it less and less, and which we have, and I'm proud of our numbers. But there are those unfortunate situations, which are outliers, believe it or not, where you have a child who picks up a gun and kills another human being in a heinous way. And I'm forced to make that tough decision because the systems, the institutions before that moment, before it made it to my office, failed that child. And so those are the tough discussions that we have. And so this is not me kicking the can down the road. This is not me pointing the fingers. It's me saying, as the chief law enforcement officer, as the chief prosecuting officer that is charged with making these tough decisions, we need to get it together, because I don't want to see more and more children coming before my desk and I have to make that tough decision. And oftentimes not, unfortunately, I will have to file charges against that child as an adult. And that's the harsh reality of the criminal justice system. That's why y'all elected me. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm gonna tell you the truth. The system is flawed. It's failing them. And I have to make determination on whether or not we keep our community safer. And oftentimes, when I weigh the facts, when I weigh the evidence, when I weigh the options before me, unfortunately, this is the best option for me to keep Miss Geraldine down the road, who lives in the same neighborhood as that child, safe, so she can go to her mailbox and not be in fear and have the possibility of getting her head blown off. That's the reality of the situation. And we need to do better as a community so we don't have any more children coming before my desk and I have to make that tough decision.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Now, one of the questions, we actually have a question from the chat. So if you all have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we're going to be starting to give these to the panelists. So this one, I think, is based off of something that Dr. Brannon had said. This is from Megan Heller. When a youth is identified early as capable of committing this level of violence, but is not open to services due to prior failed experiences, what can we do?
You can keep society safe and the community safe by keeping that child off the street, is what you can do. And as there's no better example of this than a case that we've all been exposed to and somewhat traumatized to recently, which is the Parkland case, in which the shooter in that case had significant, overwhelming amounts of treatment services over the years, incredible amounts of treatment services in and out of his home. When you look at a case like that and you say who benefits from treatment and who doesn't, clearly he didn't benefit from treatment. So what would have been the best thing in that scenario? Well, to address in any way that we could the safety of the public, to make sure that the public is protected against that individual. That's where Mr. Pryor's got to make these tough decisions about, well, what do you do with someone who we know is dangerous, who's not amenable to any sort of treatment interventions, who we need to get to a different place? And then the treatment for that person becomes teaching them to manage their behavior, not to change their emotions, not to become more pro-social, not to learn how to connect with people and do kumbaya anymore, because we know they can't do it. But what do we do to convince them that it's a better option not to engage in this behavior because their life will be better if they don't engage in these behaviors? That's what treatment has to be in that set. And we have to have the settings to do that. But the first thing is safety. What do we need to do to keep other people safe in the community who could be harmed by this individual?
Okay, it looks like we have some more. The chat is so funny. For households with parents where English is not their primary language, how do we assist them or get them involved in the discussions for change? Are there resources, community forums in their native language to help those parents be more involved with their children? I don't know if either of you have been able to see any of these types of resources out there for people who are foreigners who don't speak, English. And is there anything that we know of?
There's a lot of community programs out there. I'm a part of most of the community platforms and volunteering and speaking and teaching children about their legal rights. There's community programs out there in various languages that cater to Hispanics, Creole. Again, I think there's a lack of knowledge that these community resources are out there. So in addition to having these discussions on these platforms, we need to find a way, even as defense attorneys, when I was working at the public defender's office in the juvenile division, I made it one of my personal, outside of the juvenile system or outside of the public defender's office, is to meet with these community platforms and actually have the resources in my office to give to the parents, because sometimes the parents come in and they're at their wits' end. They don't have the proper knowledge to do the research. So I think that's part of the public defender's office as well, is if you have a child that's already introduced to the system and we have the knowledge of these resources, let's share it with the community. And I know that there's a lot of community advocates that's on this panel that actually interact with the court as a mitigation factor, so the court can consider, again, a rehabilitative portion. But there are community programs out there that cater to Spanish, Hispanic, and Creole, and all sorts of languages. We just have to share it.
And before we get to Mona Lisa, actually, we do have a community activist who's out there in the ether on our chat, Mona Lisa. But before I bring her in to say a little tidbit on what she knows about these types of issues, we have another question from Monique Dallion for Dr. Brannon, who says, what are these specific treatment options for youth that shows a lack of empathy?
Right. So that's what I was really talking about before. And Ms. Green, just one last comment on that last question. Broward County Mental Health Association and Florida Psychological Association do a very nice job of maintaining lists of providers who, for different cultures, different languages, for people to be able to access services too. So I'd really recommend people access those two organizations to get those names, because they do keep a database of that. The other thing is, in terms of interventions, some kids are open and amenable to pro-social type of interventions. getting them involved in activities of helping other people, getting them to do the opposite of being violent, getting them to learn empathic responses. They have the capacity to do that. Other kids, like the question just came across, don't have the ability to do that. So for them, behavioral intervention, structured programs, teaching them that some behaviors are better than others in terms of obtaining your goals or maintaining your freedom might be another one as well. Or being able to live in a society, you know, where you're not constantly punished or put down. So those kinds of things are really the intervention strategies. You have to do behavioral strategies and teach people that some behaviors are preferable over others, as opposed to a more emotional based approach that you can do with kids who can learn to have empathy and consideration for other people and want to do that and find that reinforcing. The other point to that too is that what they see in their home is what they're going to do in the community. So if they see good relationships between their parents, if they see connections, if they see problems and conflicts get resolved in a healthy way, they're going to model that behavior. So kids watch, they learn, their home is a learning laboratory for that. And the more connections they see that are healthy between relatives, the better they'll do at exhibiting those things themselves. If they don't have that, then they got to get that in the school setting or through intervention programs.
Thank you, Dr. Brannon. And a little follow-up. I think Megan, she's coming back. She's coming back for us, and she's saying keeping dangerous kids off the street definitely has value, but unless they are willing to voluntarily enter a facility or have a rap sheet a mile long for DJJ to order a commitment, you can't really get them off the streets. So what else is there? Like, how do we actually get them off the streets if they're not willing to listen?
That's an age-old question. Dr. Brannon, I'll let you.
I was hoping you'd take it, Mr. Pryor.
I'll default to what I said early on. You don't want me to make that decision, and that's what I tell youth whenever I meet with them. You know, that's why I try to focus on I feel that my calling as state attorney is to really try to get to these children, get to individuals, meet them where they are, to deter them from committing crimes, not in the traditional way of just locking up everyone and putting fear in their hearts, but trying to create programs to give them access to a second chance. And so I think we need to invest money in those type of programs where we meet children where they are, and we try to incentivize them and really get them to understand that there's value in them being an upstanding person in society, showing them the value of that, but also giving them access to resources to where they don't feel that they need to exhibit this type of behavior. And so I think that, I know it seems cliche, I know it's aspirational, but that's the best way of doing it, because I'm telling you, the way it's working now is not working. And so what I tell people is, let's keep them out of the system, because you don't want them or their case coming across my desk, because it's not going to be good. That's just the reality of the situation. I can't make it look pretty for you. I'm not going to sit up here and lie to you and say that we're going to let every child free and we're going to rehabilitate every child. We don't have the resources to do it. And we have a legislature that's not willing to invest in that and allocate funds for that. So I'm telling you, let's do everything in our power to put our resources, our tools together, our brain trust together to keep people out of the system, to keep children out of the system. Because once again, you don't want them coming across my desk. You don't want their case coming across my desk, because I also have to factor in public safety. I'm not an activist. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. My job is to keep the community safe. But you should take solace in knowing that you have a Black man that's lived the Black experience. You have a person that understands that we need to give children a second chance. But also, I have the constitutional duty and the responsibility to keep our community safe. And I have to weigh that, and I have to weigh it heavily. So let's keep them from getting to me. That's my answer to that.
Ms. Green, I hear the frustration of our attendee there and what she's asking. So really, here's what I can say is that a kid who doesn't want treatment, who is not open to these kinds of strategies and interventions to change their behavior, is very difficult. And so one way is when they come to the office of the state attorney, that by being arrested, something may happen in terms of them getting into a program. If their behavior is extreme enough, they may wind up getting Baker acted. If they're using substances, they may get Marchman acted. Short of all of that, it's extremely difficult to get, especially a teenager, into some type of treatment that will change or alter their behavior when we see them headed down the track and the train's on the other side and we know it, but they won't get off the track. So the only ways to address that really is to find somebody they trust or they connect with. It could be a minister, it could be a coach, it could be another family member, it could be a therapist somewhere. But who do they connect with? What are they interested in? It could be a professional wrestler for all we know. But who can they connect with? Who can they deal with? Who has their ear? Who are they willing to listen to? And then you can start to develop treatment strategies from there. But initially, it's very frustrating getting them to take that first step. Who do they trust? Who can you get them in with? Who can give them the right messages?
Dr. Brannon, let me ask a quick question. I want to know, so I hear what you're saying, and that's kind of what I was thinking about, that trusted voice. But in the reality of it all, is that type of time invested in that child to find that trusted voice that they will listen to, or they'll be like, I ain't got no time for this. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to go ahead and just lock you up. Because I hear what you said, but is that type of investment made to find a person that this juvenile is going to connect with, that you can start building a treatment plan that they may be able to benefit from? Or, you know, it's 500 more kids out here we got to take care of. So yeah, you got 2 hours. And if the 2 hours are up, then you just take the extreme measure of just putting that person away and not having to deal with them. What you have
we're not going to reach everybody. So my thought is, you know, if we just through our efforts, if we reach one, if we can stop one school shooting, if we can just stop one incident from happening, we've done our job. So we'd like to reach every single one of them, but we won't. There's no magic that Mr. Pryor's office has, or that I have, or that any parent on here has. We don't have any magic. We just do the best we can to try to divert people from doing things that we know are headed down the wrong track. But if we can just
is investing time considered magic?
Well, maybe it's magic for some people. For some people, nothing's going to help. But if we can just get to some of them and address more than we're addressing now, and take direct intervention methods to be able to correct behaviors that later on result in school shootings, we're in a much better position than we are now, as opposed to just worrying about why we're not doing what we should be doing. Make some steps, do anything to affect a change. And sometimes just getting somebody who they trust to talk to take them in a little different direction. Small changes can produce big results sometimes. And that's why the effort is always worth it.
Thank you, Dr. Brannon. I think, okay, so Mona Lisa wanted to say a few things. Gave her a shout out beforehand. Mona Lisa, are you still on here?
Yes, ma'am. How are you?
Okay. I'm good.
Good to see you. Good to see all the people I know. Pretty nice. Okay, so I'm listening to the conversation, and there's a huge missing component. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mona Lisa Weber. I'm out here. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm out here. I deal with the incarcerated youth. I deal with high schools. I'm in the streets. I take guns away from kids. Like, we in the hood, our street leaders in the hood, we doing work. We are missing the biggest component, which is relatability. Convicted felons need to be part of the rehabilitation process. These children is not gonna listen to nobody in a suit. These kids ain't gonna listen to nobody. If they're Black, they barely gonna listen to white folks. They want somebody that looks like them, that they can relate to, that got gold teeth, that got dreads in their hair, that are out here, that have been shot, that have gun wounds, that are in wheelchairs. These are who the kids are listening to. However, the systems are set up where all those people are X'd out. They can't get hired because they have a record. They can't get hired because of this. So all these systems are linked together to keep the real people who these children can actually relate to outside of the systems. There's a lot of men out here who are gunshot survivors that are dealing with, in this topic, we're dealing with school shootings. Well, what about the everyday shooting of our communities where kids are being killed, where I get phone calls and I don't even see the stuff in the news? So we need, if Mr. Pryor is talking about changing the systems, we have to start getting all these men that did 10, 20, 30 years in prison that can really grab these children and really make effective change. These children, when I bring community members into the juvenile facility, and that's where I met Miss Earley several years ago. I have to give her a shout out. I wish she would have won. But this lady is so dope. She was going in there teaching them their rights. This is what I would do. I would experiment. I would bring men in there with suits, you know, that have jobs and careers. And then I brought in, you know, who we call our hood street leaders. These kids gravitate to hood street people. And we're missing that component. We continue to talk about this, we continue to talk about that. I'm speaking from experience. I've seen it. I know it. These kids are running behind dudes who the systems don't want to hire. So we want to talk about real rehabilitative change because the systems are not doing it. They actually make the kids worse, because I know this, because I'm in there and I see it. And I go toe to toe with some of these quote unquote correction officers. Like, we got to be real about the rehabilitation. Our children need relatable people that look like them, that are from their communities, so they can therefore build trust. I know several men that stop shootings in the community. All these kids have guns, and you got these OGs that sit there with them and like, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. So a lot of these street dudes are doing the police officers' jobs, but they are not being recognized or brought to the table in order to really make effective change. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate it. But that's just the reality of the situation.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. We appreciate.
I want to say, Mona Lisa, and we do have to reconnect, and she makes a valid point, and here's why. This is why I started in the Assistant Public Defender's Office, specifically in the juvenile division. When I first started and I would talk to these juveniles, they didn't want to hear anything from me because they saw that I was this lawyer and I couldn't relate. It wasn't until I told them that I was previously incarcerated or I grew up in the inner city, then they started to open up to me. And to this day, when I visit my clients in custody, sometimes they see me, they judge me from the exterior, and they don't want to relate. They don't want to talk to me. So you make a valid point, which is why, again, I'm in the community. And I think this is part of the reason where yes, we're talking about it. This platform is great, but we have to go into the community, into the centers, into these urban league. These community resources are out here, and share our story. And it doesn't have to be about prior incarceration, but if they see that you're there, that you're taking the time out to share your journey, maybe that one person will gravitate towards you in that space, in that moment. It's hard to forge that connection in the courthouse because it's intimidating. It's the courthouse is nothing but bad news to them, but maybe outside of that element is where we can reach our kids. So I will continue to teach and reach out to the children because I know that I made it out of the criminal justice system, and I can share that story of encouragement to them that you don't have to take this route of violence. You can change your life through proper help, proper treatment, proper mentorship. And then this is how, like Dr. Brannon said, our goal is to save one, because the domino effect can stop if we save that one. And so I challenge everyone watching today, find that one child, niece, nephew, and just start talking to them. Ask them about their feelings. Let me just say this last thing. It has nothing to do with the law. Again, I'm coming as a parent of 4. Talk to your children. Ask them how, what was going on in school today. You might say, well, I already do that. But no, when I say talk to your children, listen to them, because they're going to tell you some things that they've heard or see in school. But we got to forge this connection with children outside of our home. And this is the only way we're going to effectuate change.
Thank you. Thank you, Mona Lisa. Thank you, Ms. Earley. What I wanted to add on is how do we reconcile the fact that we have, and I understand that demographics play an important part when it comes to gun violence, right? We have demographics in one area where we have, for the most part, mass shootings are committed by white people. And then we have the, gun violence and the poor Black and brown communities that we are, obviously talking about right now. So how do we reconcile that fact that, a majority when it comes to school shootings are actually committed by white people? Like, what is the topic there? We're obviously not talking about someone who looks like them coming to speak to them and getting the guns off the streets, right? There's obviously going to be some type of demographics that play a part in, certain shootings as opposed to others. So I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Brannon.
Yeah, we studied that a lot. And, the problem is that there's not a large enough grouping for us to make connections between them. Like, look, for instance, what happened this last week. We had a female shooter, a school female shooter. That's extremely unusual. So we're still trying to put those kinds of numbers together. We do better at risk factors, but you're right. I mean, serial killers, school shooters tend to be Caucasians. And so you look at that and you say, well, there's something about that planning. There's something about holding that revenge, and holding those motives inside, that anger build up over time. There's something about that seems more consistent. Now, maybe over time that'll level out, but that's what we're seeing right now. But the commonalities are more difficult to pick out. We just know that certain things like kids being bullied in school has a big effect. We certainly know that kids who feel ostracized and left out has a big effect. We know that kids without good parenting support has a big effect, and don't learn or see pro-social behavior. That has a big effect. So all of those things contribute, but why it breaks down around racial lines, we're still studying that. As a matter of fact, a bulletin just came out from American Psychological Association last month about this. So we're still uncertain. We know the data is there, but we don't have enough of that data yet to be able to say, this is the reason why that's occurring, among one racial community as opposed to another.
Ms. Sheriff, did you have something? I thought I saw.
Oh, no. I think Ms. Foster wants to make a comment though.
Right, I was just about to say Ms.
Okay.
Foster.
Yeah, let's
had her
give
hand up
Ms.
for a while.
Crystal Foster the floor.
Hi, good evening. I'm so sorry. I had Zoom issues and I wanted to, I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm so sorry. So I'm an activist. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm an activist here in Miami, Florida, and I didn't sign up for this. I lost my brother's children, to gun violence. He was killed by a police officer, and his wife was killed in a drive-by shooting. They left behind 6 kids, and I'm raising 2 of those kids. Between my mother, my family, and I, we're raising 6 kids with no parents. I firsthand have seen the issues that are going on that no one wants to address. And with me, I always like to be transparent. The number one issue that I've noticed is that there's a lot of funding in our communities. There's a lot of funding in our communities that are not to organizations that are not active. And the problem with that is that gun violence brings a lot of money into our community. So they don't want to stop the gun violence. So the organizations that are receiving all of these funds are connected to all of the politicians, the mayors, so they don't want to help the city. They don't want to go into mental illnesses, which is one of the biggest issues that we have. And if we don't speak on the issues, we will never resolve the issues if we don't speak the truth of what's going on in our community. Everyone knows Crystal Foster. I'm all over the news. I'm with every family. They prey on the families that lost a loved one. You have pastors, and I'm just speaking on what I've seen firsthand. You have pastors, you have the politicians at the funeral homes, the directors. As soon as the loved one gets killed in the community, they're preying on the families to receive the free $7,000-$8,000 of the loved ones getting killed in the community. That's given to the families, and the funeral homes come and they say, we can help you with the funeral. We'll pay. They're pretty much taking a check from the families. So when you have all of these corruptions going on to your city, they will never fix the issues because it's money that's given to them. The second thing that I noticed is that we don't vote on the people that are actively out here doing the work. We vote on what's you're going to be able to give to me from my organization. The only time you see our politicians are when it's time to vote. And if we don't speak on the issues, it would never end. One of the things that I've also noticed is that, when we go, for example, I had some kids that was going to jail constantly. The judges are letting them out. What happened to the system? We had 10-20 life. The gun, if you get caught with a gun, you get 10 years. There's no guarantee on these laws. And if we don't change the system, it's gonna always be broken. If we don't stand together, we can't say Black Lives Matter if it doesn't matter to us as people. And as parents, we can't always blame parents. Yes, the parents are friends with the children. We don't get involved in our children's social media because social media is one of the biggest factors of gun violence as well. But if we as parents also don't play our part into going into the social media of our children, being on top of our children, if the school system will contact the parents and let the parents know that your child missed school, we will never be able to fix the system. And that's just, it's so much that I've seen, but that's just a little bit of what gun violence is for me in the work that I've done and that I'm currently doing.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much. I mean,
Thank
we
you
can
so
go
much.
on and on and on about, gun violence. And, we, of course, we know that there are vast differences between, the gun violence when it strikes the white community as opposed to gun violence as to what happens in the Black community. We can talk on and on and on about that. But we do have 2 minutes left, y'all. So if you have questions, real quick, put it in the chat because we are about to end this program. It has been a phenomenal panel. I thank you all for attending. I appreciate all the panelists for everything that they have given to us. They have fed us tonight, y'all, with some knowledge. Even our activists, Ms. Foster and Mona Lisa, thank you so much for coming out and attending this event and providing the knowledge that you have. We welcome it for sure. So I'm looking at the chat now. I don't see anything coming through. So I'm gonna give our panelists just the last few words so that we can close out.
So I just want to I'll make a last comment about just identifying kids who are at risk. I think that's so vitally important. And if we do just one thing out of these panels and discussions, if we just get better systems at identifying kids who are having problems early on, and we know the warning signs now, we know what to look for. We can't guarantee what's going to happen in terms of outcome, but we do know that there's some things that make it much more likely that a kid is going to act out in a violent way. So being able to address that early in the school systems where you see it most often, and being able to get that child diverted into some kind of an intervention program, and having those intervention programs is so vitally important to being able to, or how we go about advocating or being activists in the community. We have to get that ensured. So at least those two things would make a difference. And thank you for having me on this panel.
And I'll say thank you as well, Ruby, for having this discussion, and thank you to all of the organizers. We appreciate your time. I'll keep it real simple. Don't give up the fight and don't give up the hope, because the moment we lose faith, the moment we believe that we can't make a difference and can't make a change, then we've lost the fight. So don't stop, continue to do your work, do your piece. It takes a village, and never give up the faith.
No, thank y'all. It's an honor to serve on this panel with such esteemed panelists, and thank you to the organizations for hosting this. I'll leave you with a quote. Dr. Martin Luther King said that we're all inextricably intertwined. We're caught in the web of mutuality. What affects one affects us all. We can't be what we ought to be, or we can't be our best selves unless our brothers and sisters down the road are what they ought to be. And I say that to say, we can put all the energy on the criminal justice system. We can put all the energy on a prosecutor. We can put all the energy on a decision I make or choose not to make. But are we putting that energy early on in our stakeholders? Are we applying that pressure to the Broward County schools? Are we applying that pressure to some of the services that are supposedly being offered in our communities, but they're ultimately failing our children? And then year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, and then ultimately they commit the ultimate crime, and then it makes it to my desk, and then that's when everyone pays attention. We need to pay attention and wake up a lot sooner. Everybody claims to be woke, but I don't think they woke enough. We need to wake up and get involved early and get louder early, and not when I ultimately have to make the tough decision and everybody's looking at me. And then I ultimately look at everybody and say, where were you when this child was exhibiting this behavior at age 12? Where were you with the services? Where were you in being loud when our school board was failing this child, or our community service that was supposed to offer services to this child failed? And so those are the questions that we need to really address. Those are the conversations that we really need to have. And that's why I'm here, to hold us all accountable and just give it to you real and give it to you raw. We're waiting too long. If you're coming to me and you're protesting about a decision that I made about a particular child, you're too late. You should have done it a whole lot sooner. And that's where the discussion needs to be had. So thank y'all for having me. And I'm gonna continue to be here to fight the good fight and hold us accountable and really steer us in the right course and really trying to change these children's lives. So thank you.
All right, and that concludes the program on the impact of children and gun violence. Thank you all for tuning in. This is Ruby Green with the TJ Reddick Bar Association, the League of Women Voters, Broward County, and we also have the Urban League, YPN, and the Race and the Races. Follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. Good night, all.
Like our YouTube
Good
page.
night. And
Race
thank
and
you
the
for
Races.
having us.
Okay, then you too. Get that shout
And
out.
you too, Race and the Races.
Yeah.
Bye, y'all. Bye, sis. Bye,
YPN.
Sandra. Good seeing you.